This is the official podcast of the G20 Interfaith Forum, where we discuss the key events, the goals, and the focus of the organization. Welcome to another episode of the G20 Interfaith Forum podcast. My name is Stuart Bird.
I'm Marianna Richardson.
We're the co-hosts of this podcast, and we're excited because today we're joined by a special guest, Yashika Singh. Yashika, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yashika, as we start this podcast, we want to have people know who you are. And so we would love for you to start with just a little bit of an introduction about yourself.
Okay, great. So simply put, I am at the public broadcaster at the SABC, and I head the religious department there. So not many people realize that in the broadcasting environment, you have a division called religion. And so I'm very privileged to be there. I've worked with faith-based organizations for most of my life, and I love it. I love the space of diversity. So I've been a producer, director, a voiceover artist, a presenter in my young days. And I really enjoy the opportunity of meeting new people all the time and sharing what faith gives to the world.
Well, we have enjoyed getting to know you as well. As a matter of fact, how did you get involved with IF20? I mean, we look forward to G20 Interfaith Forum there in South Africa, and we have loved having you involved, and we would love for people to know how that happened.
Well, of course, it was through a wonderful connection of mine, Sandile, and he's also going to be playing a very important role in the journey ahead to G20. So, you know, personally, the G20 summits have always intrigued me internationally, and I was quite amazed when it, took place in Brazil and in India, etc., where the world came together because there are big issues that need answering. And if we put our minds together, particularly the interfaith environment, we can really come up with fantastic and creative solutions. And I truly believe that. So as much as G20 hosted many politicians and great leaders of the world, we feel that civil society has a much stronger role to play. And so I became involved with Sandile, where he said, look, this is what's happening. We got the IMF, and they have been doing fantastic work. And in the recent weeks and engagements, I've seen your website, the YouTube platforms. It's absolutely amazing. This is what we need to have. And I think, it'll only go and grow in strength as we go further. So I have come into the space, and particularly because I work in a very diverse environment at the SABC, I'm so privileged to actually be part of a team. We have Jewish and Muslim and Hindu and Christian and African religion representation. So when I first started, it wasn't very easy because it's a male-dominated world and media is thoroughly male-dominated. So to break through the chase was not easy. It was quite challenging. Sometimes smiles worked, but I believe in faith. So yeah, that pulled me through. So here we are, and I believe it's going to be a significant time for us in the history of our country, because South Africa is seen to be almost like a beacon of light in the continent, and I feel that it brings the different spaces together, East and West connect in Africa.
Well, I'm glad that you said that because truly when we talk about what's happening at the IF20, the fact that G20 is in South Africa, and the fact that the AU, the African Union, has become a part of G20, all of those things really make it, I think, this year, G20 year there in Africa, very significant. And we are just so excited that interfaith is also becoming a part of the conversation. And as we were talking before, the fact that South Africa has truly become a beacon also for religious freedom, for welcoming all religions. I love the fact that we are there this year.
100%. And I feel the role of the civil organizations, and particularly the interfaith movement, is very, very strong. I come from a history of the struggle days, particularly in the 80s, and it was actually the religious institutions that brought what we would call the comrades, at that time. And comrades in South Africa has more of a social connotation rather than what you see in other parts of the world. It was simply bringing people together. And today we have that opportunity to build social cohesion to such an extent through the work of the interfaith movement. South Africa could have easily fell into the space of a civil war before we had our democracy. But it was the prayers of all our religious leaders, the organizations, the temples, the churches, the mosques, the synagogues, all came together. Our indigenous traditions even had mass prayers on the mountains in KwaZulu-Natal because people did not want a war. And I believe if there's a will to that, peace can be easily achieved. It's a long way, but I feel that, there's hope. And now with the buzz that is happening, we've had Africa Week, we've had, people talking about what they would want to share. And more than that, you've had these substructures of G20 coming along. You've had C20, which is on culture. There's also D20, which is on disability. And South Africa takes a pivotal role around disability and those who may not have their voices heard. And I think this is where religion plays a role.
Thank you, Yashika, for giving us an inside look of how religions and interfaith collaboration have helped the country in the past, and how you think it'll continue to help. And I think that one of the benefits of having the G20 in certain countries and IF20s, like we were talking about, South Africa can serve as a beacon of hope to other countries, so that they can see how interfaith collaboration can help with social cohesion, like you mentioned. You said that, you mentioned the Africa Week, the event that happened about a month ago. We would love it if you could explain to our listeners what that was and what happened there.
So what was amazing was the fact that we were able to interact with the Sherpa, Ben Yobart, from the G20, and he gave such a dynamic talk about why the role of civil organizations is going to be critical. And he put forward the voices of faith, and he said, there's one thing that South Africa has at its pillar, is that the work of the faith-based organizations can never be underestimated. And it goes back to the vision of IF20, where we speak of the fact that we acknowledge that religions play an essential service in healthcare, in education, in the protection of our environment. But most importantly, it's the protection of our dignity and the ability to practice our faith freely. We've never had that in the apartheid era. So Africa Week raised some of those very important points about how the role of religion plays a key role in our life today. And more than that, I think since the IF20 was established in 2014, it's drawn upon a wide range of participants, that have come together to celebrate faith and hope. And the achievements about the individual, interfaith groups like the CRL. So Professor Msomo is the leader of the Council for the Protection of Religion and Language, and he was one of the chief speakers, at the Africa Week. And he shared such beautiful gems of how religions have engaged with one another over a period of time. He also stressed that we are also challenged as a country. We are not addressing issues of poverty alleviation, yet the faith-based organizations continue to do that. We have not addressed fully the idea of technology being an enabler to support the marginalized and the unemployed. We have the largest youth population is in South Africa, but we've not yet struck that median in order to build them and to build them into areas of technology and startups, etc., like perhaps in the US and India and other countries. But we need to learn from these countries like Brazil, etc., who've used technology to reach the masses quite effectively. And I think what Africa Week also brought about is the voices of even smaller, voices like disability, because we had the representative there, we had government representatives as well, and authors and writers, because they wanted to hear from the interfaith organizations. We had people like HWPL being represented. And these interfaith groups in South Africa do very, very good work. They not only do they bring the religions together, but they do active work on the ground. They're building schools, they're creating job opportunities, they're serving the poor. And faith-based organizations, for me, is a call to service. Any religion, there's a wonderful saying in the Baha'i faith that says Africa is the eye of humanity in a way. And, God will experience love and beauty as if we were in a garden. You don't want the protea to be the same as the rose. You want each one to flourish in their own and experience that fragrance. So just like that, Africa has all these different faiths that have played a pivotal role. I think if you take Islamic relief organizations, you take Seva International from the Hindu community, you take Ma Africa Tikkun from the Jewish community, you take the huge bodies of the Christian churches in South Africa, the Anglican Church, the Methodist, the Charismatic churches, Catholic Church, which is, one of the largest, and the ZCC, which is the Zionist Christian Church. They play major roles in upliftment. And coming from the media space, not everyone gets page one in the media, because it's dealing with religion, so it should be somewhere else. But we have a good opportunity right now with the webinars that we want to do, is to project what the service structures are doing, where are they helping people. Recently we had the floods in the Eastern Cape and in KwaZulu-Natal. And do you know, it was a singular moment in our history where all the faith organizations came together. We have amazing people, and I hope that we would be able to get some of them on the webinars as we go across, that have really stood the ground in order to serve humanity. You had the pastors, you had the rabbis, you had imams, you had swamis converge together to support the cause. Even in KwaZulu-Natal with the floods, that area, because of the climatic conditions and being near the sea, will be subject to floods again. And so the faith-based organizations have started re-looking at alignment and building, etc., so that people don't become victims again.
Well, and you did such a wonderful job of starting to talk about these webinars that we're starting to do, as you were discussing some of the issues that are so prominent in what's happening in South Africa, but also what's happening throughout the world in terms of religions. I did want us to talk just for a moment about the plan for this webinar series. Now, this will be starting next week on July 10th. We're going to be having it every week for all the weeks leading up to the forum. So it really is trying to get people ready to understand some of the major issues that will be discussed during the forum. And so I'm hopeful that, that this will be a wonderful introduction to some of the major thoughts and feelings that will be happening. So please let us know, what kind of an impact do you think this webinar series will have?
I think it'll have an absolutely incredible impact on the country, the world at large, because it's the first time that religions are going to share the issues around the SDG goals, which is solidarity, equality, and sustainability. And they'll be bringing to the fore, how do we offer solutions and create these moral frameworks that resonate with the global and local context? And I think it's very critical, because faith not only deals with service, but the idea of helping another person is a call of the divine in whatever religion you belong to. And I always say service to humanity is worship of God. Service itself is worship. So we're going to see some amazing examples of amazing people who do and have done the most amazing things in the country. We will highlight faith-inspired initiatives. There'll be case studies. There'll be innovations that address key G20 policy related areas like food security, gender equality. Gender equality is one of the most important things. You know, we do come from patriarchal societies, and unfortunately, religions have perpetuated those ideas as well. So there'll be challenge to religions, but religions will also offer solutions to say, we recognize that. We also know the majority population are women, and they are taking a lead in various activities. I mean, you know, I was riding in the train in Cape Town, and every morning when you take the train, it is the women who take the Bible and start singing, not the men. They take the lead in just chanting and singing because they've got 2-hour-long journeys between their homes and the city. And these are practical examples of how women take the lead because they want to inspire people around them. And by the time they get to their destination, they are so enthused and energized that whatever challenges come across the day because they are facing poverty and hunger every day, they have a little bit of hope because of what transpired. And I think these are some of the stories we want to hear and share. We also want to look at those game changers in climate action. Now, not only do we see that, and we've seen that in Brazil and other parts of the world, but climate action is our responsibility. In Christianity, we speak to stewardship, the idea of, you know, taking care of the environment. In the indigenous knowledge systems, you are the earth. Earth is in you. You know, in Sanskrit, there's a wonderful phrase that we say, Yata Priti Tata Brahmande, which means as is the above, so is the below. So whatever we do has an impact on the greater whole. We don't stop for a moment to think about the plastic wrapper that we have that we would want to throw. What is that impact to the soil and the soil conditions? So we need to go back to understanding organic life and organic farming. And faith institutions play a huge role in that sense. So these are some of the areas and themes that we want to look at. Education is critical. We will be speaking to professors, we'll be speaking to captains of industry, and we want actually the business sector to be involved in partnerships with the religious communities. Because if they're in partnership, they will work well together for the end, for the same goal, because that's what we are looking at. South Africa plays a prolific role in terms of solar energy, and we've got wonderful solar farms and wind farms around the country. So we want to see how that has enabled poorer communities and how churches have become involved to serve that need as well. So we'll be also looking at addressing hunger and poverty, how religiously motivated people are addressing hunger and poverty in South Africa, and how they are building multi-faith efforts that are looking at addressing poverty and hunger. It is the most amazing thing how feeding schemes have started, how hampers are being distributed around the country. We even do shoe distributions, at the end of the year for the kids in the new year, because uniforms, if it was not the civil action of the churches and the religious institutions, and I will say all of them, that we actually got school uniforms at the lowest cost and shoes at the lowest cost, because that helped youngsters in the country to be equal. It doesn't matter if you went to an affluent school or a public school, but you wore the same uniform that you could buy from the same stores. So there's no discrimination. And that came from the advocacy of churches and religious institutions in the country. So economics, as we know, and the financial perspectives and faith is a huge one, because economic justice is a big issue in the country. The debt issue, the debt crisis. We have international bodies that have loaned monies to poorer countries and they're not able to pay. But if you take Singapore, you take India, you take all these countries that say, No, we go back to what we make. Let us be proud of what we can make to sell to the world instead of constantly begging or asking, for support everywhere else. And we know the trajectory of what has that been happening in recent times, with the global powers in the world. So these are some of the deep dive discussions that we'd like to have. And we want, and we will be getting some amazing people who are professionals in their field, who are able to articulate the issues at hand, and also pivot that to the policymakers towards G20. Literacy is another issue Africa has been facing, and we want to understand that from a harmonious perspective, let's put it that way, because through the initiatives of the seminaries and the schools and the teachings of faith in the country, we were able to target some of the most challenged areas, to discuss issues of finance, etc. And we feel that partnerships, again, with the economic billionaires and companies need to play a pivotal role. In fact, there are many companies and shopping outlets that have partnered with religious communities for hamper distributions. They've given them at low cost, in fact, even saying, we will support this initiative with you. And we've seen that politicians, faith leaders, business come together. So I think these webinars are going to be really, really strong in looking at how finance can be a big role. And we will get eyeballs, definitely, because everybody wants solutions to that.
Oh, definitely.
Another big issue that is happening is the refugees. Unfortunately, human trafficking is a problem. Now, I come from the television sector, and we actually did a television show where I had my producers go undercover, especially in the Limpopo region, and they were able to track truckloads of young girls going across the border. And it's maybe a story I will share a little bit later, but in the series. And well, at least we were able to get the police on our side, and we saved the young girls. But more than that, what the show then did outside of the public viewing space was to bring in women leaders in business and say, support a sister campaign. And they did that. They're now paying for their fees at university. Some were young. The saddest thing is that child trafficking is mostly with young girls. Young girls have challenging issues, and then they team up with older men. And unfortunately, it's very difficult because once they get kidnapped, it's very difficult to get hold of them. But today, I'm glad to say that there's wonderful case studies of where they've achieved success. They're studying at universities, and their lives have turned around. But that's a few. We need to tackle more. And it is modern slavery. And it's a really sad thing because going back to my earlier position around patriarchy, it's something we have to address. Even when we're doing our sermons in our temples, in our mosques, in our churches, we need to set the example. And that has been noted by the South African Council of Churches, for example, and other leading bodies in the country.
Oh, I agree. I did want to just quickly go through just so that our listeners understand when these happen. On July 10th will be the first of the ones that we're doing, and that will be on the role of interreligious actors in addressing hunger and poverty. And then these will be every Thursday, once a week. On the next July 17th, it will be on the economic and financial action, faith perspectives on economic justice. And then on July 24th, it will be on addressing multi-religious tensions through literacy and enhancing understanding and harmony. July 31st will be on migration and refugee movements, human trafficking, as you were discussing, and modern slavery. And then finally, the last in the series will be on August 7th, will just be 4 or 5 days before the forum. And it will be faith-based approaches to disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. So this just kind of gives you an outline of when those will be and also what the major topics will be.
Absolutely. And I think it's important for South Africans and the global community to reflect on some of these key areas, because I think disaster preparedness is a big issue across the globe. Earthquakes, things that happen to poorer communities, even with the crisis that the world is facing around bombs and threats, etc. Are you ready for it? Are you prepared? What happens in a situation where there is civil unrest? Who are the people that will be in front? It reminds me of a time at Wits University a few years ago when we had the issue about fees, and it was called the Fees Must Fall campaign, because poorer students were not able to afford these very high fees. And unfortunately, there was a bombing and, things like that. But there were women in saris who just stood in front and hugged these youngsters and said, we are your mothers. Sit and listen to us. And there were moments where they were angry, and they just looked at these simple women who had no weapons, and they cried. So these are some of the things I feel are poignant stories to listen, where not even page one of the newspaper will reflect upon it, but it's being discussed in the interfaith communities. It was the Catholic priest, the Brahma Kumaris, you had the Muslim women that came together and said, we hear, we see you every day, we know you, let's put an end to this, let's work together. And that gave the impetus of change at the universities.
And I love these stories, and that's the purpose also of these webinars, are stories.
Absolutely. Well, it was an amazing opportunity. And I think I'm looking forward to each day and each week, as we share them and talk to these wonderful and amazing citizens of the world. And I think the focus, the fact that we're pivoting Africa in this space also shows the world that we're not this dark continent that people thought we were, 50 years ago, that there's a rising and there's an energy and there's a celebration of who we are as well. And that for me is one of the most important aspects in diversity, is celebrating our uniqueness.
And I'm looking forward to celebrating and learning in these webinar series. And like you said, I hope that people around the world realize that this these webinars aren't for specific people, they're for everybody. You don't have to be living in South Africa, or you don't have to you don't have to have a job in any of these specific sectors. But if you could just explain, Yashika, quickly, you've already mentioned, but why just any citizen, take maybe even a student like me in a different country, would be benefited by listening and hearing.
So I think it's a very unique spin that we have, with G20, because people assume it's all political, and nothing will ever get done. Also, the trust factor. A lot of people trust their own churches and their own spaces because the congregations grow there. And I think, when you see civil society engaging in robust conversations, you'll find, captains of industry, as I said, lecturers, you'll have experts in the field that will come in. Students like you will definitely want to know, but hang on, he's a scientist. What has he got to offer around this area on education? Hang on, she's a student like me. She's my age. She's got a whole lot to offer because she's been involved in the interfaith environment. So suddenly, the youngster in America or Russia or wherever will suddenly say, if they can do it, I can do it too. And so they will be, inspired by the stories. They'll be inspired by what is happening, and concrete evidences will be coming out through the webinars. It's not a talk shop. What we also want to do is to maybe include some inserts and little clips from some of the world, thought leaders that will be converging there, so that everyone can say, wow, somebody from Ireland is here today and they are sharing this wonderful opportunity. Everyone will be converging at one space. And I think that is amazing. It's really unique.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Yashika, for answering that. Mariana, do you have anything you wanted to say before we finish up?
No, I just wanted to second what Yashika just said. This truly will be for everyone. And I do hope that people understand that the hope here is that the individual can make a difference. You know, it's not just about policy, but it's these individual stories of people who have taken a stand, just like you were talking about those mothers who, you know, literally took a stand over something that was very important for their children. And I do think that each one of us can, and I'm hoping that that will be the inspiration of these webinars, is that people understand that an individual can make a difference in their communities, whatever that is, wherever you are. And so thank you for that theme and that idea.
You're very welcome. You know, we've talking about technology a little earlier. We've got social media, and all this is going to be on the various platforms. We've also got TikTokers and influencers. So we want to show them through our reels, through the little stories, you know, how people have changed, and they're ordinary people just like you and me. So I think that will play a big role during the journey of the webinars. One of the key things, you know, that inspired me is the principle of Ubuntu. And I'm sure many of you heard the word before. And there's another word called umoja. And umoja means unity. But Ubuntu goes back to some of the ancient spaces of Native American tradition, Maori, African tradition, ancient Hinduism, where they speak of the principle of I am because you are. You are because I am. What it means is this wonderful coexistence that exists between you and me. We can be in any part of the world, it doesn't matter, but we are connected because of each other and because of the divinity that is prevalent as well. So in saying that, I believe this intrinsic nature that humanity is here for one another, and we are here for the welfare of all.
Oh, I love that. And I do want to just put in a push for the forum in that Ubuntu is the theme of the forum in terms of
Absolutely.
just bringing everyone together from all over the world, all religious faiths. That's kind of the focus of what we do at IF20. Thank you for your work on this series, but thank you also for your support of Interfaith and IF20.
And thank you too for taking it seriously and, you know, putting all effort behind this. We really thank you for that.
Mhm. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to another episode. Please watch the IF20 website for the links to register for the upcoming webinar series, and for other information in our blogs and in our social media as well. Thank you for joining
Thank you.
us for another episode of the G20 Interfaith Forum podcast.
The podcast provides information and discussions on the G20 Interfaith Forum, but the views expressed are those of the individuals involved and not necessarily the official stance of the forum.
The content is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered professional advice or expert recommendations. Listeners should exercise personal responsibility, seek professional guidance, and conduct further research when making decisions based on the podcast.
The information shared may not always reflect the most current developments, and external links or resources are provided for additional information but are not endorsed or controlled by the podcast.
By listening to the podcast, listeners acknowledge and accept these disclaimers. Please be aware that the content of this podcast may be subject to copyright. Unauthorized copy, distribution, and reproduction of any part of the podcast is prohibited.